Um, then those are the 12 main trends, as I mentioned. I'm going to go very quickly through them. The next one, and I'm going to go one by one and try along the way. I try to do a bit of research and try to focus a bit on what I think would be of interest to the participants. Because, of course, the main thing is what is really common between, large cold country of the north and the opposite end of the world, an island, warm climate country. Well, I think at the end, when I look at these days, I think there should be some commonalities in some areas of interest because I mentioned the global urbanism. A few years ago, I had the chance to visit, to go for a couple of times, and also to do a charrette in Havana, Cuba, and to see Cuba, which is again an island, tropical, warm climate, very different than Canada, closer to us. And working with architects and urban designers and urbanists there, we find a number of real commonalities and real understanding of issues. Then the first one I wanted to highlight in terms of the trends is regional planning. It's very important because we have these, I call them regional cities, large metropolitan areas. Here you have Toronto. Toronto itself, 2.7 million people. The metropolitan area, depending how you measure, is around 6-7 million people, going towards 8 and 10. Slightly smaller Montreal and then Vancouver. It's something that it's quite challenging in places like United States, but and even it's challenging here. What are the bodies that coordinate development for the entire region? And then the evolution is to go towards a smarter growth management, something that the government of Ontario started to do around 2006. The emergence of a stronger urban structure with the nodes. You have here some intensification nodes, corridors on the basis of the regional transportation. There's a number of initiatives, including Montreal, regional plan transit system. Vancouver had this for quite a while. Here in the Greater Toronto area, one of the main factors was the Regional Transit Authority, provincial one, Metrolinx, in this service expansion. That's what unites and puts the region together. And as I mentioned, there is this emergence of a regional city. This is Peter Calthorpe a while ago defining what that would be. The second major area of work and the trend is this whole work for resilience, sustainability, and public health. Three, overlapping areas, each of them with the individual take. Something that is extremely important, as you know, through climate change all over the world. And there was work starting on this for quite a while. As an example, more recently on public health, around the last 15 years or so. The resilience came to the forefront, of course, the last few years, mainly through the adaptation as well as mitigation to climate change. And it's extremely important because on one hand, we have some of the highest gas emissions in the world due to our resources, but at the same time, we have a lot of water, we have all these resources, and you have the growing population. Then here, I just wanted to highlight a bit the tendency in the last few years for a measurement or more global, a composite system of indicators. Some of them focus on resilience, some of them, even this is the Conference Board of Canada, the community well-being, One Planet Living, trying to put together not just, I would say, specific aspects like energy or pollution, but also more social aspects, health and happiness, equity, local economy, cultural, all these things together, and to try to measure and to respond in a more objective way what makes a development sustainable. There's an emergence of a number of, I would say, very interesting and great projects across the country. We still have to catch up with, I would say, some of the maybe smaller countries that are more advanced on this, particularly in Europe, like Netherlands, Scandinavian countries. And I just wanted to mention here the Brickworks, which is a great complex in a natural setting or renaturalized setting here in Toronto around the Don Valley, with the brickworks, the historic brickworks of the city and the new development with the market. The Regent Park, which is more social focused redevelopment of an area from the after the war of the modernist planning area, as well as the Dockside Green, the first one. There is a measurement system, LEED ND, for neighborhoods to measure sustainability. There is the ZB in Ottawa coming up, quite interesting project, started construction, in a way built on the local heritage in the middle of the river, has some indigenous planning, relationships and issues. And there's others I'll show a little bit later on. Then here it's about the neighborhood scale, which in particular urban design deals with. I mentioned health by design, and this is work where we started to work together with public health agencies. It's not the mainstream healthcare, but the public health agencies, and now this is speeding up through the pandemic, dealing about nature in the city, looking at cities as a solution to global problems, including to a certain extent things like nowadays the pandemic, thinking about the human habitat in a system, in an ecological approach, thinking about livability, and a number of other things, access to food, eco-design. It's a very important context here. In the region of Peel, which is the kind of county, the regional government here in Brampton, Mississauga, this emerged quite early on, and it was focused because on at the beginning of active living, active transportation, because it's very much car oriented. It's a generally suburban area, and we work together with Peel Health in a very collaborative manner. We did together. They did a healthy development index. We did the sustainability guidelines, and you see them on the right side with focus on the built environment, on mobility, natural environment, as well as green infrastructure and building. From that, those guidelines, we came up with measurement indicators, and those indicators right now are applied to various scales, from the precinct to the block to the to the site, and are being updated right now to include some of the resilience aspects. You see here a bit of a different approach, which is more through conservation authorities, through engagement, the promotion of what we call low impact development, integration of nature, and I'm going to have later on a bit more, but going all the way down to engaging the residents, particularly in urban areas, to increase perviousness, to apply these softer methods as opposed to the hard engineering when it comes to infrastructure. A third major trend across the country is sustainable mobility, because as I mentioned, the last 17 years, the orientation after the Second World War towards cars and very much a replacement of working transit systems in place since first was, of course, the rail system that united the country, including at the regional level, and then later was the streetcar system in the 1920s. And now, of course, in the last few years, not just in the major cities, but also in the regions, right? And that includes the whole hierarchy of system, from the regional, the high order, rapid transit, LRT, light rapid transit, BRT, bus rapid transit, a lot of focus on active transportation, thinking about transportation, sustainable mobility, movement, access, level of service, then go beyond the conventional car-oriented engineering. Very important concepts here, like complete streets for all, and in particular transit supportive and transit oriented development, something that was in place and now it's bringing new dimensions. And you have here some images from developments, the subway going to Vaughan regional, in the regional city, a large suburban city in Markham, and the Viva system, the blue bus. You can see the construction of Crosstown, which is around $4 billion. These in Ontario alone were estimated at around $40 billion. Well, of course, it's not the same as, let's say, a place like Hong Kong, where I'm familiar with that development of transit, but it's more spread around the country. In Montreal, great work happening, the LRT in Ottawa, and development really follows and sometimes even goes ahead. And I'm going to show some examples in a minute. The next two issues I'm going to mention very briefly, and my colleague James Park is going to talk a lot more about Toronto perspective of redesign and downtown. But unlike many other places, in particular in the United States, Canadian large city downtowns have not generally been abandoned in the 50s and 60s and 70s. There were always people living here in Toronto. But of course, the Toronto downtown started in the 80s to bring a different dimension. Montreal as well. You have here examples like Griffintown, a great development very close to the core of downtown. It was not just business district with offices being emptied at 5 o'clock. Vancouver was very much the same, to the extent that they became, in a way, victims of their own success with problems like, very high densities. Affordability is a huge problem, lack of amenities, lack of open space. Mid-sized cities, though, and smaller towns, they still struggle, including, the city where I work, Brampton, and then those suburban downtowns have challenges, but they're coming. We'll see a bit in a minute. Major trend as well, I mentioned transit-oriented development in field intensification, and particularly the large master plan communities. Something that, was in certain ways since Don Mills, these suburban towns of the 50s and 60s, but came to be, in particular in the 70s and 80s in Toronto, St. Lawrence neighborhood, the idea of continuing the street grid, integrating in the downtown. And since then, you have here a whole list of, in Vancouver, very interesting projects, bringing forms from Asia, from Hong Kong, the towers with podium, higher density, tall buildings. In Toronto, for quite a while, we had this more tradition of more mid-rise, more humanly scaled, but with the advent of City Place in late 90s, a project I had the privilege to be involved many years ago. And it's something that, probably I know in Asia, I see a lot of these, particularly in China, other countries with very extensive development, but not so much in North America. And definitely, of course, in Europe, there's not a lot of land and a lot of massive development of this kind. And this, I would say the science and the art of creating these places, these large neighborhoods, was really advanced. And you have also some examples of redevelopment, Alexandra Park with affordable housing, and the latest one, which is the interesting development in Mississauga called Lakeview, former power generating, coal-based power generating plant, which is being ecologically transformed, of course, in terms of the land, in terms of the water. It's very well integrated as a park system from the beginning and the coordination of the built form. This also could include the main institutional campuses. The University of Ottawa is integrated in Toronto, Ryerson, in Montreal as well, integrated with the city. Probably James is going to talk a lot more specific about this aspect. Very important and particular, and we like to think that this is a bit of Canadian characteristic, the fact that we look a lot more at social aspects, social justice, diversity. There's less inequality. Usually we compare, of course, like many others, with the United States. This is something that came since I would say the 70s, even the 80s, to think about vulnerable population, social support and services, to think about diversity, minorities, immigrant integration, to think about affordable housing and public transportation. Very good unifying elements. And here there is a long-standing tradition since the 60s and 70s, but of course going through challenges through privatization and public realm amenities as places for all, development, age-friendly development, we call it, from 8-year-olds to 80-year-olds, and more recently with the graying, with aging of some segments of population, thinking about aging in place. There is a great experience. I mentioned Regent Park, Alexandra Park, Benny Farm is a great development in Montreal I can relate to. And it's something that came right now to the forefront because of the pandemic, but even before that. It's something really, there's a lot of work to do. The seventh major trend it's the one for a strong public realm, for public space. This has a number of aspects across the country. I only mention a few of them. In Montreal, the Quartier du Spectacle is called. It's something focused more on entertainment. It has a great design, a great place. You have here an example on the right side of Place Bonaventure, which is basically a former highway demolished to make room for this linear park and uniting the two, because across North America we have a big issue with these urban freeways, dividing places and not really places for people. The same thing, it's Calgary riverfront, bring people back to the water in places in Edmonton, Kitchener downtown. You have other examples here. There's a whole trend in Quebec City. You have the along this the St. Lawrence River, you have all this kind of linear park combined with a highway. You'll see a bit more later on. Places like urban places like the market in Ottawa, Byward Market, with the whole plan, the way it is integrated. Toronto has a whole string, and James is going to talk more about that, I'm sure, including a series of parks. Then in a way, if in the 90s and early 2000s, it was a kind of cultural revival with the major like museums and major amenities. Right now, we are assisting all this much needed oasis of public spaces, some of great design. You have here Claude Cormier design for Bertzi Park, Sherburne Commons, another great example, and so on. One aspect that emerged in the last few years was this whole, I say, debate and the struggles in Canada and the tension that emerged to the historic fact of the colonization and displacement of indigenous population. That went down to these terrible things that happen, including the schools, to put indigenous kids in these schools, to take them away from families, and the tentative to erase culturally indigenous people. Then part of the reconciliation process, we have a lot of not just discussion and debate, but advancement on the design side. Here in the Greater Toronto area started in particular with some of the parks, some of the facilities. You have some examples here. Trillium Park, which includes places like the traditional fire pit, includes the markers that are specific to indigenous trails, includes public art aspects, but includes also different approach to nature, which comes from the indigenous beliefs, the way they look, as an example, at water, not just as a resource, as to look at spirituality in nature, integration of nature. And that's been reflected in a Thunder Bay waterfront, in a number of university colleges and campuses. I mentioned the parks, and a very important thing, and a lot of debate in planning as well as architecture circles about to promote more indigenous designers and planners and urbanists. And there's great progress, I would say, particularly in architecture. It's something relatively new. We have a lot of work to do there, but it's extremely important for our urbanists. Just as a quick example, in Winnipeg, which is a city of around 600,000 people, and they have 70,000 indigenous and Métis people, and a lot of them in conditions of poverty. And plus, of course, it's all these very much in the north, which is very sparsely populated, but that's where a lot of the indigenous population is. Then the two aspects, rural and urban indigenous population. Usually I spend a lot more time on this, on urbanizing suburbia, because Janaka mentioned at the beginning, it's a highly urbanized country. Well, according to our colleague, Professor David Gordon, and the research is done at Queen's as well as with us with Canoe, He's one of the founders. In reality, is out of this urbanization, up to 85%, in fact, is in car-oriented form, and only 15% is truly urban, which means walkable, with complete amenities. And that, in fact, is the same in Toronto, is the same in many other places. A lot of our people, in fact, we are a suburban nation. That came to be from the beginning of the colonization, the grid system, in particular, was accentuated through the suburbs, the streetcar suburbs I mentioned, and it increased exponentially through the sprawl of the 50s, 60s, 70s, and it's continuing today. That's where a lot of development, you see the high rises, downtown Toronto, Vancouver, but the reality is still a lot of development happens in the greenfield. And then if we really want to, my main point about this, the trend of urbanizing suburbia, and I have a number of articles on this, we did presentation, is if we really want to make a difference in resilience sustainability, we need to work on this 85%. It's relatively easy, I would say, to do resilient, sustainable green development in the downtown cores where people are close together. We have the densities, we do that. To do it in the 85% of the other is much more challenging. It's much more challenging to fix things afterwards than to do them right from the beginning. Then you have here some of the, I'm gonna just touch on some of the issues. There is a trend in the United States as well, retrofitting suburbia, recent books by my colleagues, New Urban is there, but we also have a specific Canadian aspects. You have here some examples in the inner suburbs of Toronto, of North York, in the city of Mississauga that I mentioned. The suburbs are different than what many people think. They're not just single family houses with the 2.5 children, the suburbs of the 60s. They're much more diverse, they're much more interesting from many aspects, and they have the life of their own. And doing this work is extremely important and something that's not usually in the forefront of the pages. And I just wanted to show very briefly out of these, the emergence of these suburban centers, the new downtowns of the regional city. And you have here the Mississauga. Mississauga didn't exist as a city until early 70s. Now it's around 750,000. You have the absolute towers of the downtown, a lot of modern architecture. We have the LRT coming, we have the GO system, and we have, increasing density to the point of they have now 60, 70 stories applications. And you have a challenge of livability. You have the challenge of how do you bring all this together? And urban design is one of the solutions, of course, but a very specific issue, and I don't know if you have that but it's something that's quite prominent in Europe in particular, is the fact that our suburbs, they have high rises. This is something unheard of in the United States. And you have here an example of Parkway Forest in North York, in Toronto, where those towers in the park, original towers, the Le Corbusier idea, became towers in a parking lot through the dominance of cars, and now they're being urbanized. And you see some examples of the liner townhouse kind of format coming and putting the streets back. You see mid-rise connecting. You can see some high-rise infill. You can see this becoming a much more complete neighborhood. Another major trend that started as Canada as well in the States is in the 60s and 70s, there were a lot of these car-oriented malls, right? Surrounded by huge area. This is the center of the mall at the center of Don Mills. Huge parking lots surrounding the whole area with some little one-story buildings. And this started around 10, 12 years ago to be intensified, urbanized. They introduced the grid of streets. They introduced these placemaking elements, the streetscape. It's more like a main street. It's still largely private. And the most important thing now, it's coming with the residential and the densities and people actually living there. Right now, in Toronto alone, there are 22 projects of this kind happening because those large parcels of the malls and the major plazas are the most available land, large parcels available for a development. It's coming not just there, it's coming in Calgary and many other cities. Then it's very important aspect of, and they're becoming real centers at the end. One major aspect sometimes is neglected and to me it's very important to unite the city together. I mentioned transit-oriented corridors. Then it's good to have these nodes of density. How do you unite them? How do you build on the urban structure? And here you have an example of my work earlier on, around 10 years ago, on Queen Street, which is a major spine uniting all the suburban areas, what we call 905. That's the telephone code for this area. And how is this linear transit-oriented development with nodes at the major stops and the transformation of what is right now a very suburban road, 6-7 lane road, into a complete street with a transit in the middle, with the BRT, and then with a variety of residential forms, making this really livable with open space supporting and so on. And development already is happening. We hope to go from this transit Zoom system bus based into BRT in the near future. And very important, I mentioned a little bit, is this transformation. We have a lot of very wide roads, fast roads, killer roads. We hate them as urban designers. And transformation has begun. On the left side, you have the Highway 7 in Markham being converted, including bike lanes. You have in Vaughan, another city in the north of Toronto, this kind of Wooner design where there is not a very clear definition and cars slow down. It's a place for pedestrians. It's a pop semi-private space, as well as development in Mississauga and others is quite challenging, working together with colleagues, engineers, but it's very important. Major trend is also what makes also the distinction between many of the Canadian suburbs where the government role was much more important as opposed to the States is the reliance in urban context on urban amenities. You don't have to have a very big backyard because you rely on public libraries, recreation centers, parks, and so on. In the suburbs, it's even more important that that's work we've done in Toronto, in Brampton, and many other places the last few years. You have some examples. We promoted, modern design because of the modernist tradition of our place. You have here examples of work amenities in Jacuzzi Park in Brampton, including some very modern, kind of gazebos where people can gather, and it's bringing our very diverse population in Brampton, where more than half of the population is born outside of Canada, and it's one of the most diverse cities in Canada. Strictly related to that is the continuing development and this. We call it, I like to call it urban extensions. Unlike the sprawl that is this unfettered development going, particularly in the States, exurban, going far away from the cities, most of the growth in Canada was in a way controlled with boundaries. Then it's happening in a more orderly fashion. And it's also happening, particularly starting from early 90s, it's happening as complete communities. It's an evolution from this conventional suburban to the new urbanism of the 90s to today. There's a new generation of greenfield development, more structured, with higher densities, a more variety of forms, better integrated with nature, more walkable. Here I'm showing some examples from Mount Pleasant. It's a large community northwest of Brampton. And I'm going to mention it a couple of times. We had transit from day one, including regional transit, the Green Line, you see, including the transit spine that unites the whole neighborhood with the service expanding and development was going on. And you have an urban structure with local parks, with a natural heritage system in the middle. And also you have the core of it, which is, we call it Mount Pleasant Village, was designed as a more radial form. It's fully walkable, 5 minutes, 5,000 people. It has the square in the middle with public amenities. It has the now the market. It has the bike system. The first complete street is a place where in the square people can go. We have yoga day. We have a number of examples there. And we use a lot of what we call alternative development standards. Innovation is very challenging, particularly when it comes to engineering. Okay. And the next level is just coming right now. Here you have on the right side, we have something that frankly, even 15 years ago, if you had asked me, I would say, boy, that's gonna be very difficult. High rises, mid rises in the suburbs, in the greenfield, who's gonna go there? People go there to have a backyard, right? Well, the reality and the market show that people wanted to go to do that. There is an emergence of these forms above our expectations. And here you have the node, the center, we call it a mobility hub. You have transit going on in expansion, the regional transit, 15, 30 minutes headway for the trains. You have the square on the north side. You have 24-story high-rise being developed, the whole neighborhood in that area, an open space system. It's all very much walkable. It's really a great story, then a great example. I can tell people, if we can do it in Brampton, everybody can do it. It's established the new model for greenfield development. The 10th item is sustainable infrastructure. It's a very important one, emerging, and particularly in the last few years. Why? Because, as I said, there was a lot of development in Canada, a lot of infrastructure being built in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Now, that infrastructure, which is roads and sewers and water courses and bridges and all that, was done with the concept of the time, was done monofunctional, right? The bridge has one cars to cross water body. Same for the roads, same for the water and all that. Now, a lot of these are coming to age, including highways. Then they're kind of started to fall apart. They need to be fixed. They need to be repaired. Now, because of the current view on resilience sustainability, we can do that in a much better way, in an integrated way, in a way that we look not just at the functionality from the, let's say, car perspective. We look at them as a piece of resilience, as a piece of green infrastructure, as a piece that is also an urban design piece. It has an aspect which is not just aesthetics, it's functionality. It's also a place for people. To me, it's extremely important, and I'll show why. And there's a number of projects, including in Toronto, including in Calgary, the East Village. I mentioned Bonaventure, Cartier Bridge. There's great projects in Toronto. Here you have a few examples. On the left side, you have the stormwater pond that, in fact, it's a park feature in Calgary on the Bow River. On the right side, you have the port lands, and I just had a brief chat. I saw the port city in Colombo, in Sri Lanka, and this is, in a way, an alternative to look at that. What happened in this instance, and I hope James is going to talk more about that, I'll mention it just from this perspective of infrastructure. This used to be wetlands of Don River. And then the water was put in a channel at 90 degrees and look at it as a nuisance. Now the river is being recreated and put back. It's a $1.3 billion project on that side. Recreates nature, recreates habitat, recreates parkland, water storage, flood protection, and at the same time creates developable land on the side, because that creates also this human habitat that I was mentioning. On the lower right side is the first example built a few years ago, West Donlands, where what you see here as a park with a little amenity on top, in fact, is a flood protection feature, right? It's something that protects from water the major part of the downtown, but it has a park on top of that. Not too many people realize what that is. Then it's not a dike, it's not a dam, it's something that people can use. And here I wanted a little bit to talk about the main project I'm working right now, which is in Brampton. It's called the Riverwalk. Brampton, when this was the area was colonized by the British in 1820s. Of course, they did this concession grid. Two of the major roads intersect on a creek. The creek didn't look like much. It was not enough water for the mill towns at that time. But then every 5 years started to flood the little downtown that developed. It's now downtown Brampton, of a city of 660,000, 670,000 people now. In the 50s, to take care of that, the channel that you see on the right side was built, and that solved the flood problem for the next 75 years until now. Downtown never flooded, but took the creek, took the water away from the downtown and from people. Nobody knows that we have a little creek there. In Brampton, there's no mountains, there's no water body, it's just that peel plain. But guess what? With the advent of more catastrophic events through climate change, that whole area can flood again. Maybe tomorrow, maybe in 300 years. But as you know, the frequency is increasing. Then we started around 2011, together with the Conservation Authority, to look at how can we solve the flood problem, but at the same time to revitalize the downtown, which is prone to flood. How we can integrate this flood mitigation with the economic development, resilient, sustainable, healthy development with public realm. How we can create a place, an attraction for a city that doesn't have anything major. How we can introduce innovation. We came with a vision in 2014. You have some images how this channel, the creek, could look at. We came with a number of principles, including, to protect, to green. We look at placemaking. You can see a lot more about this on, you have the web address here if you're interested. Then part of the vision, we have this integrated approach to planning. We combine engineering, resilience, active transportation, public realm, placemaking. We did an environmental assessment that was successfully approved last September. We secure funding from the federal government to 40% of the flood protection. We are working right now on an urban design master plan for the whole valley, and you have here an example of what that means. In a way, it's the Emerald Necklace of Boston brought back. It's creating the major asset and attraction. You'll see on the website, if you go, there is a video, there is a VR experience, virtual reality. That's a bit older, but we are updating. In fact, we have that updated. Through the Urban Design Master Plan, through the detailed design for flood protection, we hope to go into construction by 2024. We still need some money for that. It's gonna be a game changer for the downtown. And here I have some of the images of the parks, the squares, the place for entertainment, for people, the place where our very diverse population comes together. It's a place where can build into the public health of the whole area, access to nature and so on. Trying to get towards the end of, I'll try probably 15 minutes to wrap up. Let me know, Janaka, if I'm going too much over time, please. Then one of the other major things very close to my heart is heritage creation. It's close to my heart because being trained as an architect back in Europe, and I came to Canada 2 years ago, look at what is the local tradition, what is the heritage. I learned that. I led the heritage process for like 20 years. And basically, I set up the heritage component of design and planning. Also created that within this very topic. A lot of time people, when think about heritage, they think about conservation, Heritage Act in Ontario, but it's beyond that. And years ago, to our Heritage Board, I published an article about, I call it living heritage, when we can learn lesson heritage and use iteration of design. We can look at the character, at the spirit of place, and we can create that as an improvement. And here on the right side, one of my preferred creating Heritage Downtown Toronto by KPMG Architects, where the heritage pieces are integrated with the very contemporary pieces in a seamless way. The rhythm, the proportions are being kept, the same kind of brick material specific to Southern Ontario. You have the more contemporary intervention on the left side. It's an award-winning project by Ari Perini here in Toronto. with the halfway house, with specialty housing for the and then you also have heritage at the district, at the neighborhood level, the distillery district, a major attraction in downtown Toronto. And there's a number of projects very similar to that, thinking about heritage at the neighborhood level, not just at the built level. And also the heritage, by the way, nowadays it extends beyond buildings, right? Extend to heritage landscape, to cultural heritage, including the unbuilt and the written, even the stories. And it also extends beyond the colonial heritage and the post-colonial heritage. It extends into the heritage from the indigenous people before white man came in North America. Then there was a movement to reconsider heritage in the 70s, conservation with successes. There's still challenges. And there's emergence of some Canadian aspects, and I just wanted to point out because it's, to me, it's something, although you have a very different history and heritage, think about it. My advice is in this kind of terms, integration at a larger scale. Avoid this, I call it tokenism, when some pieces are being kept maybe, and definitely think about not lose those very important. We try to think also about this very important element in the city, which is urban memory, the layering, the complexity. We are here in the new world. There's only, 200-300 of more, modern history, but they are very important elements to create value, to increase sustainability, to establish or redefine the character and identity. I have some very brief examples here from Brampton. Including keep some of the agriculture heritage. This is a former house of a farmhouse. There was some, it's being preserved with the landscape, with the trees, very important. A former rural school that became a recreation center, where a very diverse group from the community, which is a lot South Asian in that area of Brampton, comes here to play cards, and it's very interesting the way this adaptive reuse responded to the needs of today. You have also a kind of a prominent villa overlooking what was the creek at some point, with a contemporary addition, recalling the conservatory of the past, now being a public facility where everybody can come. And you have on the left side the contribution of the Peel Courthouse, combined with new development, combined with transit, with landscape, and the importance all this has in the downtown fabric. An important aspect for us, including for Brampton, is to go in heritage beyond Victorian, I call it, beyond the 100-year-old pieces, historic pieces, to go into the modernist heritage, because they are 50, 60-year-old buildings. They come to age. There was a lot of construction. There was a lot of creativity at the time. You have on the right side, Toronto's Massey Hall here in Toronto, with this collegial Gothic being expressed in a very contemporary style. You have some mundane, I would say, industrial buildings being adapted. Here you have examples, as I mentioned, in Brampton, social housing in the brutalist times of 50 years ago. And you have also the continuous threat when a lot of people, including, unfortunately, our provincial government, think about the modern, oh, that's not heritage. And you have here an amazing piece, Ontario Place by Zeidler, which is threatened right now. And then adaptive reuse is a continuous ongoing piece. But it's very important. There are challenges with materials, technology of the time, but there are also great projects. And then the last one trend is going to be in terms of planning and design, and the tools and the integration of design in the whole planning process. Here we have in Canada quite some challenges, because starting mainly in the 60s and 70s, there was kind of divorce between planning and physical planning and design and architecture. As you know, the term urban design is specific to English language. Other languages and concepts like urbanism or Stadtplanung or urbanismo, design is built in the concept. Then urbanists are also designers. Then in Ontario, and Janaka is aware of that, and Jiva, 20 years ago, we started to go back into this and we started to promote design in the planning process, in the planning profession, first with Ontario professional planners, later with CANU. We still work on that. There's a lot of work to do it. Part of that was to look at integration of design in the process. The diagram you see here, it's complex and it takes quite some time, but shows how design at all the levels of planning, from the city-wide official plan to secondary plan for large areas to more detailed urban design focused plan, the precinct, the tertiary plan, all the way to subdividing plans, site planning, and so on. It's a thread going on in terms of built form, in terms of open space, character, and identity. And we try in the last 20 years in Brampton and other places to put together all the tools. And they include high-level policies, include city-wide urban design guidelines, includes, as I mentioned, an integrated process, include design review at all these levels, including for applications, including the last 10, 15 years, it was this emergence of design review panels. They came from the British model. They're widespread right now, including here in Ontario. They've been in place in Vancouver since the 70s. It's a great tool to increase design quality, to increase professional dialogue, and to increase the quality. And I saw that. I've been in Ottawa since 2013, 13 for 8 years soon. Then we saw the increase in quality and the dialogue that's happening between designers. Very important. Very brief, I'll mention a tool. I don't know how your planning process is. In Canada, the development permit system came to be around 20 years ago, and I think in Vancouver. It brings together all these aspects that usually are disjointed, right? Policy, regulation, like in zoning, guidance, and then the standards as well. In Brampton, we is the first city in Ontario to create such a system for a larger city. It could be quick, effective development system, work onto the quality. We have quality provisions here. Is an opportunity for what is called in the States form-based control to integrate heritage, some standards. It's something, I don't know if you don't have that, it's something important that we came in Brampton as an alternative. It's slow to catch up though in Ontario, but that's another issue. This is something a bit of a new addition to my presentation slide, but I wanted, because of your interest in urban design and the profile of the Institute, to talk a bit about urban design in planning in urbanism, municipal and planning level, and the actions in particular. Something with CANU, with the Urban Design Working Group, we set to do some time ago. The need for design education among planners, engineers, other city building disciplines, architects and landscape architects. December, I did a presentation, Royal Institute. Many architects think, okay, I am an urban designer because I'm architect. There is an aspect, there is urban design, as you know, is not architecture or larger scale. It has specific aspects, interdisciplinarity and so on. It's also education of public officials, politicians, other professionals, media, the public, engineers, right? Quite often engineers don't think about, I'm not an urban designer, I'm just an engineer. Well, you are, the way you design a road, a bridge, and all that. It's also about the promotion of new urban design focused planning tools, which I just mentioned before. And we have a municipal urban design roundtable here, and we exchange info. How do you do that? What tools do you use here? It is this very important aspect, multidisciplinary work and integration. I mentioned the need on infrastructure, right? It's something urban designers by definition have to do and are doing, but not so much on other disciplines. Then you need to learn from engineers. We need to learn. I can tell you, since I've been in the last few years in the engineering division, I learned a lot. I worked with engineers my whole life, and then there's a lot of opportunity there. It's also about these tools like the participatory design events. And you have here a couple of images from some of the events we organize. Challenging to do nowadays: tours, workshops, visioning sessions, charrettes, urban design. Something we promoted and used to do every year, at least one at the planners conferences, usually to assist to educate other planners, but also to work with excuse me, I think somebody's calling. I don't know exactly. Okay. Then it's also about the use of visualization tools which are specific for designers, from the sketches, 3D renderings I mentioned, video, VR. You have some examples here. And it's also advocacy, involvement, events, conferences, tours, something we've done in Canada through Canoe for quite a while. But it's also about this whole idea, which I include often in the definition of urban design, as an art and science of creating places for people, about placemaking. It's about the power of design, the transformative power to trigger positive change, to advance innovation, to integrate aspects, resilience, sustainability, healthy development, beauty, communication, heritage, memory, to contribute to progress, to help to tackle some of these big problems, social problems, catastrophic events, to create a physical base for the activities, for the events, to facilitate the human relationships, to create value and attraction. New Zealand did a great work and paper on that to stimulate the green resilient economy, to create sustainable, livable places for people. What's the legacy of our work? How they last? To create character and identity in places that change so quickly as are the cities. Like Brampton is growing by 18,000 people. Toronto is growing by 100,000 people every year. Canada is growing by 300,000 people, mainly immigrants. How we use urban design and good design to bring them all together, to create livability, to bring people to cultivate, comfort, safety, happiness, joy, reconciliation, healing. And then the last and not least is the urban design for power. How do we work with the wealthy, with the power, with governments of the day for social equity, for prosperity for all, to disperse that, not just for the wealthy, about affordability, accessibility, and diversity. Okay. Oops, for some reason this doesn't seem to. Okay. And related to that, the trend towards not just good design, but design excellence. There's a number of things that you have here. The design, Urban Design Awards I established in Brampton since 2006. You have some examples. We try to look beyond just buildings. We try to look at neighborhoods, at places, at squares. You have here quite a variety, from Habitat for Humanity, affordable houses for the poor. In the modernist Bramalea, you have the Mount Pleasant neighborhood, you have public amenities, you have employment, the new library, amazing architectural project, but not just architecture with the park. You have heritage pieces, you have transit pieces. It's a great way to use design, and particularly everybody has the right to access good design, not just downtown, not just wealthy people. That's why the suburbs in particular need these more important than anybody. And to wrap up, I think I'll try to do it in the next 2-3 minutes, a bit about the lessons of the pandemic. There was a lot of discussion, a lot of talk. It's still in the press. What's going to happen due to the pandemic? People are going to fly into the suburbs. They all want cities, downtowns are going to die. Cities are going to die. Well, you see, I think the outcome, the result is still to be established long time after that. But the pandemic accentuated some of the trends and the concerns, and the work was already there. Then part of Canoe in the fall, we look at that and we summarize it to 4, maybe 5 major issues and lessons to be learned, my areas. The first was the access to nature and open space. How much important is, even more important than ever. Access to affordable housing. Right now we have a huge crisis. Of course, it's cold here. You have homeless. How do you deal with that? You have access to sustainable mobility, alternatives like active transportation, and you have access to amenities, the 15-minute city. And very briefly to conclude, I'm going to show some examples of the work. Access to nature and open space. This is a great park system, national kind of park, Downs View, and also relatively smaller park designed by Forek here, showing all the diversity, how important was to keep elements like the old trees, and how important was to have this huge stormwater pond integrated as a feature for all. Down in Brampton, we have the natural heritage area along this recreated creek when nature took over in absolutely no time. It was a great experiment when basically this was farmland for 150 years, and then we developed it and we introduced this, spine connecting woodlots and stormwater ponds and recreating water. Nature took over instantly. And look here on the right side, you think that this was the peel plain since 200 years ago, right? Nature takes over. Just give that opportunity. Okay. On the access to housing, a huge issue, in particular in the large cities, and the whole discussion about missing middle, all these smaller incremental, smaller scale development. The right side, you have the timber construction, modern timber construction along Main Street, something that we hope it's gonna come even more. Then the accommodation of this affordable housing is not just through major big infrastructure investment, towers and all that could happen in these smaller, much more friendly development models. You have examples in Ottawa in some region, you have mid-rise along transit, all these trends. And a bit about this, discussed, started from Paris, the whole idea of 15 minutes neighborhood. Then I look at that and I said, well, this is not really that different than the ideal neighborhood concepts of 100 years ago, or even the way small towns like Brampton was created. Brampton 100 years ago was really 15 minutes neighborhood, complete a town complete with everything, all the amenities. And on the right side, we have one of my sketches at the beginning of the pandemic when I realized I live in a suburb of 1900. I have very much everything I need, including access to nature. I have greenery. Then you haven't read all the paths. And right now, we very much live in our neighborhood. There's no commuting. We use our car very little. And it shows this is a kind of stress test in the pandemic of the neighborhood design that I mentioned before. There is great initiatives of sustainable mobility, long-awaited bike lanes for people who don't want to take the car, don't want to pollute, don't want to contribute to climate change. And then it's physical exercise. In Toronto, finally, the bluer lanes, bike lanes have been created in 2 months. In the summer, even in car-rated Brampton, you have the images at the bottom. Suddenly, taking advantage of the less traffic, those bike lanes, and it expanded like wildfire across the country. There's challenges with that. And the last thing I wanted to mention is the impact on the economy. The pandemic had a huge impact on the economy, shrinkage, loss of jobs, unemployment. Is this an opportunity to go and to build a better economy, a green economy? We have a great initiative from the federal government here about the green economy. You heard the new president and the new government in the United States talking about that. We're talking about regenerative economy, learning the lessons of the past, including from the indigenous people that knew how to live with the land in a resilient way 300, 400, 500 years ago. And then it's about the restoration economy, and about encouraging a smaller scale entrepreneurial through reviving main streets. It's about the new localism, when the global village show the challenges of importing everything for overseas, local agriculture, and so on. Very important thing, and the reflection in urbanism. And well, I managed to do it almost in an hour, I think. Then I hope I'm okay in terms of time. Those are some of the conclusions, and then I'm willing, if you have comments, questions, and all that for the next, I think, half an hour or so, please let me know, and I'll be very happy to respond. Now back to, I think, the moderator, Janica, right?
Thank you so much, Architect Planner Alex, for the informative speech and the inspiring presentation at the second series of Urban Talks by the Institute of Urban Designers Sri Lanka today. It is really interesting and inspiring, and it gave us good insight on the Canadian urbanism and its development trends and the issues as repercussions. It made to recall my memories on the Canadian urban living that I have experienced for a couple of years. That was really interesting. Thank you so much again.